Thank you. Michael Britt. My slide deck is very vanilla, non-denominational, and that's on purpose because WestNet is representing 16 western states. Over the course of time, this has been called WestNet, the Western States Alliance, or just plain Western States. Again, since we have no formal governance structure, it is what it is on a given day. Early on in the FirstNet board meetings, there was some discussion about every square meter. And to put that into perspective, I actually did the math. U.S., we've got 9,629,000 some odd square kilometers, 1 million square meters in a square kilometer. We've got 9,629,000,091 million square meters. Okay, that's a lot of square meters, and it really does put into perspective what we've got to deal with, especially in the western states. Even populous western states like California, Washington, where they have major metro areas, they still have a lot of space. And I think this map has been the best example that I've found that puts into perspective the difference between the western states and the eastern states. All the colors represent national parks, tribal lands, Department of Defense, so on and so forth, and it is remarkable when you actually look at, they're all on the left coast, so to speak. In terms of putting together the western states, when I was reviewing it, and it started out, let me see if I can get there. Oops, let me back up. We looked at the traditional western states as kind of the line that heads straight down here. But then I noted that North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska were not only have the same issues around tribal land and federal land and so forth, but they also wanted to join in. They were actively saying, yes, yes, please include us. And so we included them. And although Oklahoma, we didn't, just because of the nature of it, I looked at WSCA and some of the purchasing contracts and vehicles and so forth, and just said, well, let's just leave it where it is and see how it goes from there. All right, so when the Homeland Security, OEC, and Brian Hobson's group started putting together the coverage maps based on handheld, in-building, vehicular, and then deployables. For an example, way back when they were just putting this stuff together, I think it was July 2012 or so, we looked at Wisconsin and said, look, it's all nice, kind of green, everything's kind of happy and pleasant. And then we looked at Oregon and said, well, that's a lot of white space. And white space means it's either deployable, you have to take it with you, or it's satellite. And likewise, for Arizona, it's comparable, although we tend to get a little more interstate and highway coverage than some of the eastern parts of Oregon and Washington. And this phenomena, in terms of the white space, is pretty much a Western phenomenon. And it goes back to that, yes, there are a lot of square meters. Yes, when you get out into these areas, you really do realize that there's not a lot of people, not a lot of issues, not a lot of public safety events going on. And yet we all have our examples of, people talk about Burning Man, or I've got a place in Arizona that has virtually no population but 5 million visitors a year. It's called the Grand Canyon. And somehow those people are the ones that need public safety a lot. They tend to get lost, or they hurt their ankles, or something like that. So let's, this Western States notion started by Nevada with about 6 states. It was in response to an NGA survey or question. They wanted to write a common response. Then it went dormant for a few months, and since I had been involved with the waiver recipient group that met on a regular basis, I was missing that kind of camaraderie and figured that the state POCs needed a place to talk about issues, so I ramped it up specifically to focus on rural and tribal issues, Western states issues, and expanded it to include the 16 states noted. And again, the goal, we basically just put together a little sentence that gave us some kind of focus on what we were going to discuss and talk about. So for this slide deck, I basically went through the 6 to 8 month history of the group and reviewed some of the topics we talked about. One of the issues we discussed was tribal consultations. As we're working through the tribes, I noticed that Arizona, anyway, 6 of our 22 tribes are on the border. So when I'm talking to Fort Mojave or communicating with Fort Mojave is located in Arizona, California, and Nevada. The Navajo Nation. It's Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. What we didn't want to have happen was, if I'm communicating and giving my spin or my perspective on things with the people that Arizona agencies generally work with, and that's on the east side of the reservation as opposed to the west side, who are working with, California's local agencies that are just across. They might have a different agreement, might have a different perspective, so what we realized as a group was, anytime we're communicating, we ought to just CC the others in. So if I'm communicating with Fort Mojave, I'll CC Karen and George Molnar, just so they're aware, just so they can be part of the conversation. And it's basically to avoid any missteps or dual communication or confusion about what was really meant. And likewise, I generally try and include Kevin McGinnis, the tribal liaison for the FirstNet board, if it's anything substantial. Now, for little things that are just, we're working through some issues or at least starting the conversation, then it's not such a big deal. Part of this was brought to my attention that there are tribal consultation policies at the sovereign nation to federal level. A man by the name of Luke Johnson out of the Fort Mojave tribe tried to go through and figure out, well, with this agreement with FirstNet, Department of Commerce has a tribal consultation policy. Does that go to FirstNet? Do they use the same one? And then further down, do the states inherit that consultation policy or not? Okay. Now, most states have their own tribal consultation policy. And as it turns out, I tracked through Arizona's, and it turns out that the Department of Administration, under which the CIO lives, under which we live, kind of does and kind of doesn't have one. So the notion is, and we're thinking about, and again, working with Kevin McGinnis as well, seeing if we can put together a SLEEP specific tribal consultation policy. But again, that's TBD.
And just as an interjection, for California, we're one of the few states that actually have a governor's tribal advisor who is going to be part of our board.
Okay.
So we're a little bit unique in that.
It's good.
It's a very good thing.
All right. in September 2013, working with Christy Wild, we started regular monthly meetings with the Sleepy Federal Program Officer, Claudia Wayne, and the FirstNet outreach team. Those have been well received, and they've been very helpful in terms of facilitating the conversation with FirstNet. Part of what they kind of wanted to get a sense of is, what are the state plans? How are you, currently, how are you planning to do outreach? And this was before, this is about the time that funds were awarded, but nobody had any funds, and so it was really in the formative stages. We put together a kind of a template of, well, for instance, where is your state POC located? Is it with the Department of Public Safety, or is it with Emergency Management, or is it with Department of Transportation? Whatever. I mean, those kinds of just simple, fundamental, what's your organizational structure for your state? So 14 of the 16 states participated. We put together a summary, and it was informative to us just to get the different spends that were out there, but also it was informative to FirstNet in terms of what they have to deal with. So those kinds of things have been what we're about. And one of my favorites was we were talking about rural and how many meetings we were going to have, and I'm kind of a type A overachiever type and have way too many meetings. Everybody told me that. Way too many meetings. But somebody mentioned, I can't remember who it was exactly, he said, what if I give a meeting and nobody comes? Right? There's only 8 possible in this local jurisdiction, and they're all busy, right? Or something comes up. So as a state point of contact, that is a dreaded fear. What if I give a meeting and nobody comes? At one point in the conversation we got to, what is the role of the SPOT? Are they salespeople for FirstNet? Are they cheerleaders for FirstNet? And then you spin it around and you look at the other way and you say, well, if I'm from the statewide interoperability coordinator perspective and I'm worried about interoperability, I mean, first of all, FirstNet and the National Public Safety Broadband Network is interoperable by default. I mean, it's a nationwide system that everybody can get on and everybody can get information from, all right? And so once you get to that point and that realization, from a state perspective, having every agency on the system means you're interoperable in your state, okay? Which is a good thing that we've been working on forever. It seems like forever, not quite forever. So it's somewhere in the middle between being a cheerleader and being gung-ho for a reason that the first responder network should be uniform throughout. So recent topics, we actually did a little 10-minute session on CalFRN, and because actually for most of us it's unique in that this board was created just for FirstNet. Most of the states utilize their existing boards and or commissions that were either around interoperability or emergency management. They didn't try to create something new. We did walk through the, from Ed's slide deck, we had the readiness criteria, reviewed that and talked about what is important to us as the state and what's not so important, so on and so forth. We have a new director of outreach, Amanda Hilliard, who most people knew from Homeland Security OEC. She actually was instrumental in developing the convergence diagram, which eventually rolls LMR and broadband into a uniform singular system. Gave some feedback on FirstNet's first SPOC webinar. It was held in few weeks ago. Yeah, a few weeks ago. And then we're looking forward to the April SPOC webinar. We've received the state consultation update, again, very similar to what Ed reviewed today. And then we also recognize that the Western States Forum will convert to the regional meetings for the monthlies, but we will continue to be interacting with FirstNet as needed, rather than on a regular monthly basis. Yeah.
By regional, you mean the FEMA regions?
FEMA regions, yes. I mean, we've kind of been substituting the Western States monthlies as so that will no longer be part of the Western States regular event, but they'll transition into the regional monthlies. All right, a little bit about Arizona. We had a pre-existing governance group that was mainly focused on interoperable communications. We utilized that group as the governing body for the FirstNet effort. In March of 2012, we met with the governor's office, the public safety policy advisor, brought in Homeland Security. Karen, you want me to wait?
Go for it, I just
Okay. We met with the Department of Public Safety, Arizona's Homeland Security, Emergency Management, and the state CIO, presented what the legislation meant to Arizona, that we had, as the SWIC's office, had been paying attention to this. Everybody was in agreement that the SWIC's office should take the lead on this, and that has been in place ever since. Now, taking the existing public safety interoperable, as opposed to creating one that was custom, we have excellent representation for the state's public safety. Fire, EMS, law enforcement, emergency management, and so forth. What we don't have are CIOs, which we feel is something we're working to correct, because we need the CIOs to be, I mean, generally in Arizona anyway, at the county level, they're responsible for the IT around the EOCs and or many of the public safety agencies. So they need to be aware that we're going to get a lot more backhaul, a lot more IP-oriented connectivity, and so that needs to be part of this effort moving forward. Likewise, we don't have a lot of representation from elected officials on the board, and those individuals need to be part of the discussion as well. So we're working to correct that. Arizona is truly lucky in that the 911 office, what I call the SBI broadband, the broadband mapping BTOP program in Arizona, the SWIC's office, and the FirstNet program are all in the same office and report to the state CIO. The state CIO is the chair of our Interoperability Commission. Okay, so it's everybody in the same room, literally. Okay, and able to be aware of what's going on with everybody else. So we really lucked out in that regard. Likewise, we only have 15 counties. I can name the emergency managers in each county. I can name each county, as a matter of fact. All right, and so that really makes it more manageable. It's a reasonable number. I mean, I know California, how many counties?
58.
Yeah, that's, wait. All right, and our outreach currently, Arizona is a system of systems. Currently, in terms of LMR world, we have major regional systems around Phoenix and Tucson and Yuma and Flagstaff. And we have begun the conversation with those boards to point out and identify that FirstNet is going to be a sustainable fee-based network. They are a sustainable fee-based network. It'd be reasonable to assume that FirstNet, in terms of their negotiations and discussions, would want to hear from a blanket agency that covers 39 and 40 agencies in one fell swoop and manages and supports the sustainability of that infrastructure. And also, they've already got billing in place, they've got governance in place, and all the things that one would need to actually bring on broadband as a service. Currently, even in those regional systems, when we're talking air cards, it's up to each individual agency under that regional system. If they want them, go get them. So there's no blanket contracts, there's no negotiation leverage by having a large number of agencies involved. So now they're starting to think along those lines. So our next goal is to reach out at the county level and then drill down and talk to individual agencies and associations. All right? Any questions? Yes.
Cynthia Gomez, and
Yes.
Federal Advisory Governor. How many tribes do you have in Arizona?
22.
22.
22.
And how much of their land base?
25%.
Yeah, so that's a pretty.
With the Navajo being a large chunk in the Tohono O'odham, who are on our southern border, it actually expanded to Mexico, which is a whole lot of fun for them and us.
Yeah.
Because
Do you have agreements with those tribes, because I know their laws are completely different from each other? Do you have agreements, or how do you work with them?
well, many of them already have agreements and are on these regional systems I was talking about, like the Kokopah and the Ketchikan and Yuma and the Colorado River Indian tribes. They're all part of that regional system. And since that's in place and those mutual agreements are in place, we're going to try and leverage those and say, okay, just like you are currently operating, we're going to try and have you continue to operate, but with the added service of broadband through FirstNet. Okay? Much like Ed was saying, in terms of don't break anything that's already in place, leverage it and bring it into the overall whole. Likewise, in the Phoenix area, the Gila River Indian community is part of the interoperability and mutual aid, Salt River, Pima, Maricopa. So many of them, we've got stuff in place that we're going to leverage. In other situations, we've got a lot of work to do because we don't have the relationships built up yet, either through the emergency management and FEMA. And again, we're working wherever we can to find where the relationships have been put in place, and so we can leverage those with FirstNet.
FEMA has a pretty good relationship with the tribes.
And again, we as an office under Department of Administration don't have a tribal liaison, but we have worked with Homeland Security's tribal liaison and Emergency Management's tribal liaison, and several other. We have a tribal commission that we're working with as well. And we're learning, actually.
Are you working at all with the federal, the FCC federal task force, tribal task force? Are any of those folks like?
I'm working with Kevin McGinnis, the tribal liaison, who is currently working with many of those groups out of DC, right?
Hi, so I'm Ed Parkinson. Sorry.
And I'm looking to Ed.
And
Yeah.
I apologize.
No,
I here at the last. I really apologize.
Not at all.
We're happy that you're able to.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Honestly. So Kevin McGinnis is our board member whose sole purpose is really to interact with tribes. And we're going to be appointing we're going to appoint someone who's going to be the sole point of contact for all tribal interaction going forward. A good example, we've been invited to a couple of task force working groups at the FCC. Our senior counsel, General Counsel Stuart Kapinski, and I have attended some of those meetings. And then we're interacting a lot through regional tribal organizations, so that we're speaking and engaging with those bodies, and basically going forward, that's sort of the management style in which we see this going.
Okay, so you're kind of like exploring ways that can work, where folks can work together.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're doing. Yeah, okay. I
One-
just was
one
wondering
great-
if you already had something in place, because Arizona usually is pretty far ahead when it comes to tribal interactions, so.
On the national level, not yet. A great example is the Navajo Nation have got a core out there, so we've been talking with them to see maybe that's something we can leverage going forward with the network. Maybe it can, maybe it can't, but we're having those discussions with our technical team. But that's obviously not going to be the same throughout the country. And how we really, we've had on November 9th last year, we had a full day discussion with our senior management and the tribal task force working group that we have set up through Kevin McGinnis to try and identify the best way we can go forward in working with tribal nations. So that's hard, it's still an evolving mechanism, but hopefully leveraging experiences that you have and others. Probably.
Ours will be a little bit different, but I was just curious if you have already put that in play and which federal, forums you've been using. So I think Karen's on the right track. Okay, thank you.